Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be covering some strange phenomenon out of West Virginia, a state full of strange phenomenon. Let's get into it. Alright, so our story begins on September 12, 1952, in the small town of Flatwoods in Braxton County, West Virginia, where you had a group of about 11 boys, whose ages ranged from 10 to 18, playing ball at their local school, when suddenly, overhead, came a fireball streaking across the sky. One of the boys spotted it before alerting the others. As the fireball traveled over top of them, it continued in a southeasterly direction towards a hilltop. It was described as oval or pear-shaped, slow-moving. It looked like it was traveling just over the trees themselves. And as it reached the top of the hill, the object appeared to either disappear over or land on top of the hill. It depends on which one of the boys you ask. Some of the excited boys theorized that the object might be a flying saucer bringing an otherworldly being. However, most of the boys thought that it was just a meteorite that may or may not have landed on top of the hill. Personally, if I was there in that group, I would assume that it was a meteorite that probably just flew over the hill. I would think that there would be a rather large explosion if the meteorite hit the hill. Anyway, the boys were not the only witnesses. Other residents of Flatwoods also saw the fiery object. One notable sighting by a man named Jack Davis described it as a craft, oblong in shape, flying fast, silently, and low, just above the trees. And then you had other residents describing seeing a strange oval-shaped, fiery, low-flying object. Back to the kids. Some of the boys wanted to check out the potential landing site. 6 out of the 11 boys, in fact. You had Eugene Lemon, 18, Neil Nunley, 14, Teddy Neal, 13, Edison May, 13, his brother Freddie May, 11, and Ronald Shaver, 10. Before embarking on their adventure, they made a stop at the May residence, where Edison and Freddie told their mother, Kathleen May, what they saw and what their speculations were on whether it was a UFO or a meteorite. And they told her about their plans to go up there and check it out. Miss May was totally fine with the boys going up there, where the object landed, and she decided she was going to go with them, which, it's always good to have a supervising adult. It's funny, despite just coming home from work, she was ready for an adventure. Miss May and Eugene both grabbed flashlights, because it was getting dark, and before the group would go off and investigate the area, a few more party members would be added. The Mays family dog and Eugene's dog were brought along, and a younger boy, about 6, named Tommy Hare, also joined them. I believe Tommy was a neighbor boy who heard the commotion, and he wanted in on the adventure. His parents were totally cool with that, for some reason. It's now about 7:40 p.m. as the group headed down the main road and over to a farm. The hilltop where this object supposedly landed was on the back end of the property, which was owned by a farmer named Bailey Fisher. At some point during their travels down the main road, another dog joined in, randomly, described as a neighborhood dog. The more the merrier, I guess. At this rate, we have 8 people and 3 dogs. Pretty sizable group. I think we can call it a mob at this rate. As the group walked the grassy path from the main road, they were stopped by an obstacle. A tall metal fence gate for an area where farm animals grazed. Since this is a farm and all. Also, it's just dawned on me, aren't these guys trespassing? And I feel like a rural West Virginia farmer would probably go out armed if he suspected any trespassers. Or if he was just doing any patrols, potentially looking for any hooligans breaking in, stealing animals, or maybe just making sure coyotes or something aren't trying to eat his livestock. Anyway, let's ignore that. One of the boys unlocked the gate and everyone continued along. The grassy path soon turned into a rocky dirt one as the area began to get steeper and wooded. In fact, when interviewed, the dogs described the terrain as rough. Please don't click off the video. The group carefully navigated the windy path in the dark, and off to their right they could see down into the valley which overlooked part of the farmland. It was at this point where some of the group members claimed to see a strange object down in the valley by some trees. The object was described as oval shaped, as big as a house, and having a pulsating light. Not everyone could see the object due to the tall vegetation present. Some of the other group members were kind of too short because of their young age, and they were also more so focused at the hilltop where they suspected an object had landed. And you even had Freddie do an interview where he mentioned that he was unaware that the object moved, implying that something he believed landed on the hilltop and then at some point moved further down into the valley. Not long after some of the group spotted the object in the valley, a fog appeared from the top of the hill and traveled down towards them. As they continued through the fog, several members described smelling sulfur or a kind of metallic smell. The smell bothered their noses, burned their eyes, and their throats. The smell was almost too much for some of them, in fact. They did not think the fog was natural. The three dogs oddly did not appear to be bothered by the fog at all. Until suddenly, the neighborhood dog stopped, its ears perked up, and it growled at something, or someone, up ahead of the path, in the darkness. The dog then ran up the path and disappeared into the fog. The group continued, with Eugene leading everyone, his flashlight pointed forward. As they got closer to the top of the hill, they heard the neighborhood dog barking incessantly before it suddenly ran out of the fog, past the group, and down towards the main farm area. And no one batted an eye, they just kind of continued, like some kind of horror movie trope. Granted, they were right at the cusp of reaching the top of the hill, so I guess why stop now and head home? They already ignored one red flag with the smelly fog, so I guess why not ignore another? Continuing, the group reached a small wooden gate right before the hilltop. Eugene, Neil, Eddie, Ronnie, and Miss May climbed over the fence. Freddie, Teddy, Tommy, Eugene's dog, and the Mays family dog did not proceed, opting to stay at the fence and wait for the others to come back. And they were also left in the dark, seeing as the only two flashlights in the group were with Eugene and Miss May. They kind of just held on to their flashlights, which is kind of funny. Personally, I would have left one of the flashlights with these boys while they hung back. Anyway, the group of five followed up the path as Miss May now led. They went around a bend and were almost at the hilltop when the strange sulfur metal smell started to get worse, just as they thought they were going to get used to it. And also, to some of them, this unnatural fog appeared to be coming from a large white oak tree that was just to their left. As the group approached this oak tree and walked past it, Miss May swore she started hearing some kind of strange hissing sound. Miss May and Eugene, the ones with the flashlights, thought they saw something in the tree as they got closer. Eugene noticed a pair of glowing eyes in the fog up in the tree. As he shined his light on it, he screamed, falling backwards and dropping his flashlight. The other boys froze as Miss May also aimed her flashlight at the figure. She was about a car's length away from whatever this thing was. Beams of light appeared to come out of this monster's eyes as it appeared to scan the area. Panic ensued. While Eugene, Neil, Eddie, Ronnie, and Miss May were getting the crap scared out of them, Freddie, Teddy, Tommy were about to climb over the wooden fence and try and catch up to the rest of the group. From their position, they could see, to some degree, what was happening. The monster then appeared to hover by the tree before coming down and across the dirt path everyone was on. By this point, Eugene was scrambling to his feet. Neil was still frozen, along with Miss May, while Eddie started running. The creature hovered past the three remaining group members, hissing. It was at this point that the remaining three started to run back down towards the wooden fence. Back over at the wooden fence, the three boys that were waiting and the two dogs took off running already, heading down towards the tall metal gate. Instead of opening it properly like before, Freddie and Teddy opted to just climb over while Tommy and the dog squeezed through the metal bars of the gate. They continued to the grassy field before the gate, as they were met by Eugene, Neil, Eddie, Ronnie, and Miss May, who flew over the wooden gate, got their way down to the metal gate, and then also proceeded to climb over it. Because who has time to open it properly when you think a monster's chasing you? They continued running to the Mays' home, except Teddy, who continued running all the way to his house, which was about a half mile from the Mays' home. That boy was definitely really scared. The boys were all coughing, breathing heavy, scared, and had a few minor injuries from the frantic sprint home, as you would, throwing yourself over gates and running through woods. The boys appeared to be very ill, with teary eyes, burning throats, and episodes of vomiting. Miss May took her boys to the doctor the following day, where the doctor said it appeared the boys were exposed to some kind of chemical agent like mustard gas. While very scared, Miss May herself appeared to be relatively okay. She did, however, notice that some kind of oily residue was on her clothing, and assumed that the monster must have sprayed it at her when it passed her. She didn't notice the night of, because probably she was too scared, and also the substance appeared to not have damaged her clothes or skin in any way, aside from staining them. It's around 8:15 p.m. or so when Miss May calls the local sheriff to report the incident. Her call was answered by a Cecil Rose, the jailkeeper. Miss Rose told Miss May that no one was available to be dispatched because Sheriff Carr was investigating a potential plane crash about 20 miles away by the Elk River, west of Flatwoods. Next to the sheriff's office, however, was the state trooper office. But, once again, nobody was available at that time, as this office only had two state troopers at the time, and they were both out on calls. One of the troopers, Trooper Trebet, got into contact with Miss Rose and learned of the situation. And while he, again, could not head over at that time, he promised to send somebody to check things out. Think this story is bloated with characters? Time to add another one. Enter A.L. Stewart Jr. He is a photojournalist who worked for the Braxton Democrat, and he also worked for the county sheriff. It's a great gig. You show up to crime scenes with the police. You're able to take notes and photos for the police to collect evidence, and then you can report on the crimes for the evening news. But anyway, back to the story. Mr. Stewart was working in his office around 9 p.m. when he got the call from Trooper Trebet. Mr. Stewart then traveled to the May home, where he was met by terrified and sick witnesses. Mr. Stewart got as much as the story as he could from these witnesses, but he wanted to specifically go out and check out the scene where it all went down. Maybe even see a monster, maybe even photograph it, maybe even shoot it. He was armed. Anyway, it's not surprising that the witnesses did not want to go back up there, but eventually Mr. Stewart convinced Eugene and Neil to take him to the location where the monster encounter happened. That may sound crazy, but remember, Mr. Stewart's armed, and also several neighbors who had heard the whole commotion also decided to join in and brought their guns. The two boys who initially agreed to take the armed men to the scene at multiple times would hesitate and stop and really didn't want to continue, and Mr. Stewart had to keep coercing them to continue, which is just really messed up. I mean, I'm sure they were genuinely terrified and it was very obvious to everybody, but Stewart's sitting there like, come on, guys, just a little bit further, it's okay. Personally, even with an armed mob with me now, I still would not want to go back up there. Eventually, they would arrive at the very oak tree where the sighting happened. There was no monster in sight. Probably better that way. Everyone was kind of on edge and ready to express their Second Amendment rights to whatever popped up. Remember how this was a farm and these people are technically trespassing? Imagine the farmers just walking by, pops up like, hey, what are you guys doing? And they all just turn him into Swiss cheese. That'd be horrible. Anyway, Mr. Stewart could smell a faint burnt metallic odor, which Eugene and Neil agreed was what they smelled earlier in the night. While Mr. Stewart was up on the hilltop investigating, Sheriff Carr arrived at the May residence and got some information on the incident from Miss May. Sheriff Carr would then go up the mountain with two dogs and try to see if he can pick up a scent on this monster. However, the dogs appeared to be scared and did not want to go very far into the area where the monster was seen. The sheriff would then head home with no plans of returning until the morning, where he would conduct proper interviews and survey the area in the morning light. Mr. Stewart would also head out not long after this, planning to return in the morning to also investigate the area. But this was not the end of the nocturnal investigations, because around 1:30 in the morning, a whole bunch of National Guardsmen arrived to the area. Why were they here? Well, it was originally connected to that plane crash search that was conducted around the Elk River, west of Flatwoods, the same one the sheriff was initially investigating. You see, the National Guard were also out there looking for the plane crash. No plane was found, but I guess since news travels fast, there were reports of sightings of something potentially crashing in Flatwoods. So, a Colonel Levitt, who was originally dispatched by the United States Air Force to look for the plane around Elk River, took his National Guardsmen with him to Flatwoods to have a look around, where they arrived at the farm. They first started their search down in the valley of the farm, where they found an area where to several of them it appeared something landed. The colonel and other National Guard troops found a flat area of tall grass. This flat area measured about 20 feet in width, and they also found something that they described like skid marks, leaving behind very obvious trails. They also described a burnt celluloid smell present around the disturbed grass, celluloid being like a type of flammable plastic. Some areas of grass also looked like they had industrial lubricant or some kind of grease or oily substance present. The colonel also claimed to have found a puddle of oily substance by the same tree where the witnesses said they saw the monster. Of course, at the time this was happening, he didn't know that was the spot, but allegedly some oily puddle was found. According to Levitt, samples around the area were collected from the dirt, parts of the trees, the grass, the oily substance, and then later on in the morning, when they had returned, they found some metal and plastic looking pieces that were also collected for testing. All of this was sent to the United States Air Force. The National Guardsmen would then depart, and we'll fast forward to the early morning hours, and as the sun was rising, Stewart arrived back to the scene to have a look around. He found the same skid marks that the National Guard found, and he described them as two tracks in the grass, both about 30 feet long. The grass was obviously disturbed, and he believed some rocks appeared to be overturned as well. Stewart also found some kind of oily substance on the grass that was staining his clothes. Near the skid marks was an area with flattened grass about 10 feet to 20 feet in diameter, just like similar to what the National Guards found, which indicated something had potentially landed, or at least something large was there, present, for some period of time. Colonel Levitt, along with several National Guardsmen, would return in the morning as well, along with Sheriff Carr. The sheriff interviewed people about the incident, while the National Guard were trying to section off the area and get a ever-growing crowd of people out of the area. Much like the Hopkinsville Goblin incident I discussed in the previous video, once people in the area heard about the sighting, they flocked in droves to try to see if they could maybe see something or get a souvenir. A few days after the incident, Miss May claimed to be visited by two government agents who initially posed as journalists. The two agents inquired about any additional information and potential evidence, like, say, the oily substance that was on her clothing that maybe this alien monster creature thing sprayed at her. Miss May, however, no longer had this clothing, as she was unable to clean off the oily substance, so she just threw the clothes out. I mean, yeah, what else are you going to do? So it's speculated that these agents were from Project Blue Book. The Blue Book files did compile information on instances like the Flatwoods monster. The Blue Book files seem to try and collect as much information and then rationally explain everything. However, author Frank C. Feschino Jr., who wrote the book The Braxton County Monster, The Cover-Up of the Flatwoods Monster, one I used for a lot of my research, speculated that potentially this attempt to rationally explain everything was kind of like the government's way of trying to just cover up everything. Like, oh yeah, you thought that was a saucer? Nope. Thought that was aliens? Nope. That stuff, that's all natural. But my takeaway from that was really just no. I don't really see, to be a good skeptic, you have to collect as much information as you can and then try to disprove what you think is strange. And then if you can't disprove it, then you might be onto something. But different people think differently. Feschino, well, he did do a lot of fantastic interviews and collect a lot of information, and I highly recommend you guys read his book because there's a lot more than what I cover in this video. He was very much in the mindset of this actually happened and it was real. But we'll talk more on whether this was real or not once we get into the explanation section. But first, we got to talk about the monster. So, the Flatwoods Monster was also called the Braxton County Monster, or just Braxie for short, and also the Green Monster, which that name is kind of debatable depending on the witness you ask, as we'll see with the description, which will start off with this thing appeared to be 10 to 12 feet tall, with a blood red face that kind of looked rounded, and maybe that it had glass over its face, according to Eugene, who probably got a pretty good look at it for a split second before he shat himself and fell. He believed that it was wearing kind of like a helmet, and it had kind of like a ace of spades shape around its head. It also was described having bulging porthole eyes, which would make sense if it has some kind of helmet on its head. The beams of light appeared to come out of the eyes, and they were a range of colors: orange, green, or red, depending on which witness you ask. The coloration of the body was described as green or potentially darker in coloration. Maybe gray, maybe black. It's kind of hard to tell in the dark when you just have flashlights. And one of your sources of light also dropped his flashlight after getting the crap scared out of him. Again, it depends on the witness. Not everybody got to look at the monster for the same amount of time or at the same moment. But several of them did agree that it appeared to be wearing some kind of metallic suit with like a cylindrical torso. The lower part of the body looked like it had kind of like a metal skirt with raised parts that were thought to be maybe like exhaust pipes, which allowed the creature to hover because the creature was not seen with any kind of feet. And it's also speculated from that point that the fog that was seen that made everybody sick was potentially a kind of exhaust fume coming from this creature as it hovered. Now, none of the witnesses had actually seen specifically the fumes radiating from the creature, but they kind of trying to put everything together that they experienced. The creature appeared to have no arms, according to the witnesses as well, despite what certain media depictions show. Witnesses, like Miss May and Freddie, said that it looked like it kind of had thin antenna-like bits coming out of its neck. Kind of strange, kind of weird. Miss May also said it lit up like a Christmas tree when she shined her flashlight at it. And again, as I mentioned prior, it also hissed and maybe even shot some oily substance at people. Now, it's speculated that this thing was either a smaller alien that was kind of in a metal suit hovering about, or maybe some kind of scouting robot, extraterrestrial in origin. Media descriptions weren't very accurate initially, from what the witnesses claimed, and we can look at side-by-side illustrations of what Feschino drew based on his interviews with the witnesses and what newspapers showed at the time. You can see it's a bit different. And I feel like what the witnesses saw comes off as a bit more believable. The news outlets kind of make it look more monstrous, I guess, more alien, but when you're thinking about potential extraterrestrials visiting us, you got to kind of think in the realm of logic. To me, a smaller alien in like a metal suit makes more sense to me than, say, kind of like a monstrous alien that's just hovering there, kind of looking a little weird and disproportional, in my opinion. I mean, if you got an alien visiting our planet, they don't know if they can breathe our air or even survive in our atmosphere. And then you also have the potential of catching some kind of bacteria that we can shrug off no problem, but we'll just kind of War of the Worlds their asses and just kill them pretty fast. But anyway, that's just some alien speculation. We're gonna get into the truth. Let us first discuss the initial UFO sighting and its inconsistencies. So, first off, let's talk about the fact that all of the boys, despite seeing this glowing object flying overhead, they had no actual reference points for how far away this object was from them and how big this object actually was. They were saying it was slow moving, but it could have been a large object very far away, appearing to be slow moving, kind of like a passenger plane or maybe a meteorite. You had the boys give multiple different descriptions. Some said it was kind of like a round ball of fire, some said oval, some said pear shaped. You had one of the other witnesses say it was kind of oblong. Coloration was different depending on the witness. Some said red, some said yellow, some said orange, some said silver like. We're talking about the body of it. Some did describe thinking they saw sheets of flame that were coming off of this object, or that it was just pulsating red to orange, which could indicate that it's on fire, or maybe it's some kind of commercial plane that has lights. It flew across the sky, and it appeared to the boys to land on a hilltop. But in actuality, it most likely just disappeared behind the hill as it flew over, whether it was a plane or some kind of meteorite. It definitely didn't land. It probably would have crashed. There probably would have been a loud sound, and the area probably would have been very much disturbed. Then you have the object that was apparently down in the valley that was hard to see due to the vegetation, tall grass, bushes, and trees all present around and in the valley. Several of the members didn't actually get a look at it or get a clear look. In fact, none of them got a clear look. It was also getting dark at this point, and their flashlights only had so much of a range. As for a pulsing light, it could have been something reflective on that object, and when they were shining their flashlights down, it kind of looked like a pulsing light. One of the boys also said that they feel like there would have been a bunch of downed tree branches in the area if an object did land down in the valley. Because of how the trees were growing around the spot and up and over, they couldn't really see something large, especially one of the witnesses, I believe was Eugene, describing it as big as a house, to come down and not disrupt any of those trees. None of the investigators, after the fact, mentioned anything about downed trees. The only thing that was mentioned was grassy areas being flattened, which we'll get into that in a second. But first, we're going to talk about the monster itself. So, what about the monster? Well, we already did some alien speculation, but if it's not an alien or some kind of weird monster, what logically could have been this creature? Well, a lot of skeptics like to point to the fact that it was most likely an owl, specifically an American barn owl. They can make high pitched hissing or shrieking sounds, like so. And they can take a defensive stance that kind of makes them take on a kind of ace of spades kind of look. They also have reflective eyes because they're nocturnal hunters, and their eyes can capture as much light in the darkness of the wood from, say, something like moonlight, so they can hunt. So when you shine a flashlight at one of these things, the eyes can glow red or orange in color. They can obviously freak you out. And their faces tend to be kind of reddish, which when you shine a light at it in the dark, you're just seeing all of that. Its defensive stance, it just kind of hissed at you. You know, your heart rate's elevated, you're scared, maybe some adrenaline's going. And you're talking about a group of kids and stuff. With two adults, it's dark. You could potentially fail to properly recognize what's in front of you. I mean, eyewitnesses are typically terrible. It appears, at least to me, that these witnesses, under this high stress, poor visibility, misconstrue an owl sighting with some kind of monster. And you can't really blame them for it. Between when they spotted this thing and decided to run, all happened very fast. And also, the witnesses didn't really have a scale reference when it came to its size. It was described as, 10 to 12 feet tall. when you have a bunch of kids, two adults, again, it's dark. They didn't know at the time how high up it was. They can only speculate. It's all, at least in my head, coming together that they most likely didn't see some kind of strange alien. But what about the sickening mist that was about? Well, it's West Virginia, and you're on a high hill in late summer. Things are going to get misty in the dawn and dusk hours. And remember, the witnesses only speculated that the monster created the mist. No one actually saw any mist coming from this thing. As for the strange smell that may have led to illness, being it a farm, maybe certain pesticides or residues from farm equipment could have caused the initial smell or lingering odors that led to sickness. Perhaps some of the members were a bit more sensitive than others. Several of them were children, after all. Not all the witnesses did get sick, or at least very sick. And anyone after that visited the area didn't get violently sick either. They did get weird smells, but nobody was vomiting. Nobody was experiencing any kind of burning of any nasal or throat passages. And plus, if you're already feeling kind of ill from whatever you were breathing in, and then you do a dead sprint back home, that's also going to affect your breathing, and it'll cause your throat to burn. And all that intense fear and all that intense running can also exacerbate the sick feelings and make you more prone to something like, say, vomiting, which several of them experienced after they got home, not while they were out there and in direct contact with whatever this weird smell was. And also, vomiting can contribute to burning throats and noses and make you all teary eyed. Though I will admit, them initially smelling something that was making them sick was never really properly explained. The mist, you could say, was just fog from the elevation and the environment, sure, but the smell, at least the initial smell, was never linked to anything specifically. Now, what about some of the other physical evidence, like the oily substance and the plastic and metal bits found? Well, apparently in the West Virginia area, you have a thing called tar grass, which can cause oily stains on clothing. However, several of the witnesses who were familiar with tar grass said that this oily substance was a bit different and that you couldn't wash it out, whereas tar grass oil you can wash out. Now, some of the news outlets describe this oily substance as more like a grease. Now, with this being a farm, once again, you have things like tractors, which use lubricating grease. Tractors also can leave skid marks, like what was found, and they tend to have metal components and maybe even plastic components, which could fall off of the tractor and maybe to the untrained eye appear to be something alien or foreign. In fact, Colonel Levitt said that these pieces of metal and plastic were so small that they probably would not have been able to find them at night had they stayed longer and continued more searching and examining. All this stuff was found in the morning. One issue that arises from that specifically is the fact that there were so many people there. You had the initial group, you had the sheriff, you had Stewart in the night, along with you had all those National Guardsmen that maybe potentially dropped something that they didn't realize, found it in the morning and thought, oh, well, this is weird. Maybe it's part of this whole thing. And you also had the large crowd that gathered and people were snooping around and walking. They could have trampled evidence, destroyed evidence, maybe found something, taken it as a souvenir, or potentially left behind stuff that was then taken as evidence for the event when in reality it wasn't. Um, and then when you have stuff like those flattened areas of grass and disturbed areas, this farm had things like cows and horses, so it is possible that these animals were huddled together, laying in areas as they would, and that's what caused the flattening of the grass. And again, like I mentioned, a tractor can also cause skid marks or flattened grass areas. Just normal, typical farm stuff. And there was the physical evidence that was allegedly collected by the National Guards and sent to the Air Force for testing. However, those findings were never officially acknowledged, I guess, or anything released in terms of those findings. And I did mention Project Blue Book prior. The notes on this subject really just focused more so on disproving everything based on what was known. The Air Force kind of came to the conclusion that this was a whole lot of nothing. In my personal opinion, after looking at a lot of the evidence and taking account these circumstances, I too believe that this whole Flatwoods monster incident was kind of just a whole lot of coincidences and then people getting scared by an owl. I know maybe it might be a little harder to believe, seeing a meteorite and then a bunch of kids decide, let's go up into this hilltop where we think it landed, and then they happen to run into an owl and get freaked out by it, along with the other factors of getting sick and whatnot. But personally, I don't think this was a very genuine alien encounter. As for the legacy of the Flatwoods monster, well, the town does have its own little museum, nice and cute, and they got these large chairs decorated with the monster around the county itself, which you can go and take pictures with. Pretty cool. It's not the only place in West Virginia that has weird stuff or has embraced the weird stuff in a sense that they have a museum, like the Mothman, for example. And, well, that's the story of the Flatwoods Monster. Would like to know your opinions or maybe some information I missed that you want to mention down below in the comments, maybe. As for the next video, I believe we're going to Canada. Canada? No. Alaska. Yeah, we're going to be visiting an abandoned town. It has potentially some spooky paranormal stuff going on, or maybe some cryptid stuff going on. That'll be the next mystery video. Anyway, until next time. If you see something flying through the sky and it appears to land, maybe just go home and do something. Don't go investigate. Or at least if you do, go armed and shoot that son of a bitch. And then present your evidence and probably make a whole lot of money. Actually, you know what? Don't go shooting in the dark. You might actually hurt somebody.